Good evening and welcome to the Drive at 5 on IntellectualRadio.com/iHeart radio station. I'm your host, Roman. We have a good show planned for you today. Don't forget to stay tuned to Warriors Talk on IntellectualRadio.com/iHeart radio station at 6 p.m. Tonight, my guest is the state representative of the 26th District and the presumptive candidate. Please give a Drive at 5 welcome to State Representative Kam Buckner. Welcome to the Drive, sir.
Roman, thanks for having me, man. I appreciate it.
So please give IntellectualRadio.com/iHeart radio station your background.
Yeah. So I'm a son of Chicago. I was born and raised on the south side of Chicago. My father was a law enforcement officer, and my mother spent 3 decades as a Chicago public school teacher. I am a product of the CPS system. I did my undergraduate work at the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign, where I majored in political science. I went on to DePaul University to receive my law degree. And I've spent the better part of my career in public service, right? I spent 6 years working on Capitol Hill in the office of U.S. Senator Dick Durbin. I was a senior advisor to the former mayor of New Orleans, Louisiana, Mitch Landrieu. I worked in the front office of the Chicago Cubs doing government and community affairs there. I also ran a nonprofit, World Sports Chicago, which used sports as a tool to help young people around the city, and we impacted the lives of 70,000 young people through that organization. I've taught at the University of Chicago. I was a trustee at Chicago State University, and I've been a member of the General Assembly since January of 2019. I also have the pleasure and the privilege of being the chair of the Illinois House Legislative Black Caucus, and so this is work that is very important to me. Moving the city forward. Once again, I'm a Chicago kid. I'm raising my family in Chicago, and it's important to me that we do the work to bring the city forward.
What is your platform for Mayor of Chicago?
Yeah, so we are looking at doing a number of things to improve just livability in Chicago, but our main policy platform is what we've called our 4-star agenda. 4-star, like the 4 stars on the Chicago flag, and those 4 stars are public safety for everybody who lives in the city, a education system that gives our young people exactly what they need to be competitive in the global economy. The 3rd star is focused around giving Chicago the opportunity to have the most robust economic recovery post-COVID of any city in America. And the 4th star is fiscal sustainability, fiscal responsibility, making sure that we're smart about our legacy debt and that we're building an economic case to move the city forward.
What separates you from the other candidates? There are a slew of other candidates that's out there. What separates you from the other candidates?
Yeah, I will say that there are a few things, but one thing being lived experience, right? Being a young man who grew up in a law enforcement household, but also being a young man who grew up in a community that was very much over policed, and who's seen firsthand what it looks like when the community and the police are not connected, right? So that personal experience is huge. When we talk about education, I think I may be one of the only folks in this race who actually am a Chicago public school graduate, right? I spent all of my time as a young student, K through 12, in the Chicago public school system. I'm from these communities that we are talking about uplifting. I'm from neighborhoods that had been disinvested in for a long time. And I also would just say, from a professional standpoint, I'm the only person in this race who has experience on the highest levels of state, local, and city government, and federal government as well, because I've been able to do that work. And I have the receipts of actually getting work done in Springfield to move the state forward.
Why you think it's the right time to run for mayor now instead of waiting? Why now?
Yeah, that's a great question. I appreciate you asking that. There are the ancient Greeks had 2 ways to look at time. They had chronos, which is the tick tock of the clock, right? And then they had Kryos, and Kryos was about moments and moments that were made for certain things to happen. And then I think that this is my Kryos moment. I think I'm looking at the situation in Chicago, looking at what this city needs to move forward, looking at the fact that people don't feel safe, looking at the fact that we have some huge issues with our public education system, and then using the things that I've been able to learn using the experience that I have in life to be able to bring that change to the people. I think this is the right time, and I'm excited about what's coming.
There is a lot that is going on, and the number one thing comes to mind to residents is crime and safety in the city of Chicago. Many people feel unsafe. Others think the city of Chicago is under lawlessness rules. And a lot of people think, especially seniors, say they can't go out at night because of fear they might be targets. What is your safety plan? I know you kind of like put a bullet point, but what is your safety plan for the city of Chicago?
Yeah, those are. I just want to say, Roman, those are some true life concerns. And I talk to people around the city every single day about the things that worry them, and safety is always at the top of that list. Specifically, as you alluded to in the question, when it comes to our seniors who don't feel safe. Uh, my mother is a senior, and um, when I'm not in town, when I'm in Springfield and not in Chicago, I make it very clear to her I don't want her pumping gas. I don't want her going for a walk because I'm nervous about the crime in the city and what that means for her. And so these are real concerns that people across the city have. And so we got to be able to find a way to address that. I early in this campaign rolled out a very comprehensive public safety plan, and that plan is called Safer 77. 77 being an allusion to the 77 community groups, community areas in the city of Chicago. Making sure that each and every one of those communities has some real life safety. So, what does it look like? First off, we got to find ways um, to increase our clearance rate. What's the clearance rate? Clearance rate is the number that's attached to whether or not the Chicago Police Department is closing out crimes, or whether they're solving crimes. It's not happening right now. Clearance rates for the most egregious crimes, like armed carjacking, like murder, are hovering somewhere between 13 and 20%. That means that you have like an 80% chance in this city of participating in a crime like that and walking free. That is a problem, right? And so how do we deal with that? We've talked about increasing the ranks of CPD and making sure that we're able to fill the employment gap that exists, so we can put officers where they need to be. Also, spending more money on the mental health aspect that we see around the city, right? How do we deal with folks who are dealing with mental health episodes, and if there are calls that should be dealt with by mental health professionals and not police officers, how do we do that? Last year, the city of Chicago spent $16.5 million on gun violence prevention. That's $16.5 million out of a $16.5 billion budget. That's not enough. If we know that crime and safety is the biggest issue, how do we make sure that we're putting money and resources into the community organizations who are doing the work on the ground to make sure that folks are safe? The violence interrupters, the violence preventers, how do we do that work, right? And so we've talked about at least doubling the amount of money that goes to that from day one. And we also talk about the issues going on with our young people. We know that many of the perpetrators of these violent crimes happen to be folks between the ages of 13 and 24 years old. What do we have in place for the young people of Chicago, other than a curfew, to tell them that they'll have resources? And so what we've also talked about is having a first of its kind youth engagement superintendent or a youth engagement office within CPD that will work clearly with the Chicago Park District and Chicago Public Schools to make sure that our young people, not once again, are not only resourced, but that there is a connectivity between our law enforcement apparatus and our young people.
People think Chicago police are not following the serve and protect rule. They are reactionary instead of proactive in solving crime. Do you think Chicago Police Department are too comfortable instead of walking their beats, taking away their cars, and making them ride on trains and buses? Your thoughts on the comfortability of Chicago Police Department?
Listen, we know that CPD has a lot of issues that need to be addressed. And a lot of these issues are generational. They've been around for a very long time, but we have not seen any real movement. And what I've committed to as mayor of Chicago is making sure that we can move that paradigm, that we can start having real conversations about what true community policing looks like. I think you're right. If you talk to old school law enforcement officers, and my late father used to talk about this before he passed away, is that the advent of the motorized squad car has changed the way that people police. Because if I'm a cop, I'm going from hot spot to hot spot without having a real opportunity to engage with the people who live in my community, right? And so one thing that we've called for in our Safe for 77 plan um, is what we're calling beat integrity, right? Making sure that cops are working the beat, walking the beat, so they know the people in the communities, they know the area, and they have a relationship with the folks there, so they can actually serve and protect, as you mentioned. It also means that they've got to ride trains and ride buses and be visible. Um, Policing has to look like it's proactive, and it has to feel proactive in a way where people feel safe. They don't feel over policed. They don't feel like they're marginalized. They feel like the cops are there to work with them.
If I'm listening to intellectualradio.com/iHeart radio station, I would say, you know what? That sounds good. That sounds really good. I can buy that. But then there's the however component. The however component is the Fraternal Order of Police, the FOP. They have so much control and say so on the Chicago streets than the mayor, the governor, all put together, even state's attorneys, prosecutors. They're only a union. Help me understand why a union has so much of a pigeonhole in the city of Chicago.
Well, I think one piece that has to be recognized when it comes to FOP, and when we talk about, for instance, the Chicago Teachers Union, or we talk about um, you know Teamsters, which they cover a lot of the sheriff's deputies in the city. Um, these folks are the rank and file members of these professions who do the work every single day. The difference with FOP is that FOP also allows retirees to vote, and retired police officers to have a say so um, in the way the union operates, right? And so for some folks, they would tell you that that has made FOP more conservative, and it has given space for them to be more aggressive when it comes to their relationship with the city. No matter who the head of FOP is, no matter what's going on with FOP, I do think that the city of Chicago and FOP Lodge 7 needs to have a relationship reset. We got to figure out how to get folks in the room and have real conversations, not just about the contracts and the collective bargaining piece of it, because that's an important piece for the mayor to have to work through, but the everyday and overall safety of our communities. Because what also is true is because there is such a toxic relationship, um, not only are people not safe, I don't believe that officers have been made safer.
But do you think right now, and have anybody asked, what are the demographics of the FOP? Because it seems like it's mainly white that's dictating. You don't see no blacks.
Yeah. So I don't know the demographic breakdown. What I will tell you is
But
that
should somebody raise that issue, because it's very important, because are they speaking for the white ethnicity, or they're speaking for the city as a whole?
yeah, that's a great question. I think it is worth having a conversation about what once again what that demographic breakdown is. I know that there have been some very vocal African American members of FOP who have
But where are
stood up.
they?
So they've stood up and they've said things, and then they've been in some ways reprimanded, right? So the question is how do you allow people the space to be able to call folks to task, and not have to be reprimanded for speaking their mind? I also know that there are groups of African American retired officers who just haven't been dealing with FOP because they do feel that their voices are not heard, and so instead of infiltrating,
But some, and
they
not to
walked
cut
out.
you off, but
Mhm.
some people, and they remain nameless, say the FOP is kind of have a racial ideology
Mhm.
towards, people, a person of ethnicity. So my question to you is, will that be a focal point, or you will raise that issue? Because a lot of people are saying you have every single time there's a president of the FOP, you don't see a white person, you don't see a Hispanic, you don't see an Asian. You see a white person.
So I think that I want to be clear. The mayor of Chicago can dictate FOP's leadership, right? That is illegal.
But you
Uh,
can recommend.
no, 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 no. Federal labor law would not allow that. But what the mayor of Chicago can do because FOP is picked by its rank and file members. But what the mayor of the city can do is increase the number of minorities on the job through CPD.
And that's my next question. As mayor, how can you make sure there are more black police officers on
Yep.
the street? The number of Chicago police officers do not fit the demographics of Chicago. As mayor, how can you increase the numbers of black police officers patrolling our streets?
Thank you for asking that. Black police officers specifically have been systemically left out of the rubric when it comes to hiring, recruitment, and retention for CPD. The tests that folks go through in order to be eligible to be police officers in Chicago, they're racially, in many ways, they're racially insensitive. In many ways, they're racially biased. And I've even heard people say that those tests actually test for whiteness, which is how we get the numbers that we get. What I also know as a young man who grew up on the south side of Chicago, that if you want true community policing, you've got to start allowing folks who look like the communities they serve to be the ones who are wearing the badge, right? And so CPD has not done a great job of recruiting black folks, and I've got a handful of stories of young black possible recruits and cadets who have been kicked out of the process because of a biased polygraph test where they ask you about, gang affiliation, or folks who have had misdemeanor marijuana charges, which is now legal in this state,
But but
who are put out of the
but I
process.
that's also leads to my next question. As mayor, um, how would you handle the 2016 applicants of black police officers who applied? There was this big campaign in 2016, and those African Americans, those blacks, passed the test,
Yep.
passed the physical as well as the drug test.
Yep.
However, they did not get in because of failure of the psych test.
Yep.
The problem is not blacks are not applying, they are not just getting in. You're a state rep. You can design a law or some type of legislation. What would you say to that? And the facts are there.
Yeah. So it's 2016 recruitment, and I would posit that every year post that this has existed, and not just because of the psych evaluation. That is one thing that has weeded our people out, but there are stories about folks who have passed all that, but their credit score was too low, because CPD also runs your credit. If your credit score is too low, many folks have also been put out of the process. Um,
But
that
is that understood when you take the test? Is that understood before you apply?
is the fact that they do a credit check.
Yes.
Yeah, it's understood. Um, uh, but unfortunately, we know that is a biased way of of recruiting, right? It's a biased way of doing a certification to see who is up to snuff to actually be a cop. And so we have to throw all of those old antiquated ways out, because if not, we'll continue to get a department that does not look like the people who it serves.
There is a state law currently going into effect on January 1st. It's called the Safety T Act. Please explain what is the Safety T Act and how it will affect the residents of the state of Illinois.
Yeah, so the Safety Act was a part of the Black Caucus pillars that were passed in 2021. 2020. And the Safety Act stands for Safety, Accountability, Fairness, and Equity T today, right? And it is a reform of our public safety and our criminal justice system. A few things that the act, which is law, it was signed into law, and it will take full effect in January, as you said. A few things that it does is, one, it required body cameras to be worn by every police officer in this state, no matter what they're doing. Number two, it created a rubric for training and racial sensitivity and bias training for every police officer in this state. It banned certain type of chokeholds. It banned certain type of no-knock warrants, right? The things that we saw that were going on, not just around Illinois, but around the country, that were making communities of color less safe and creating a bigger rift between cops and police. What it also does, and this is one piece that has been in the news the most recently, is that it eliminates the cash bail system, right? So what does that mean? I mean, currently today, if you're charged with murder, if you're charged with arson, if you're charged with kidnapping, what a judge often does is it sets you a bail at a very high level, right? So, say $1 million bail for somebody who's convicted of a homicide or somebody who's charged with a homicide. If you have the means, you can pay and be able to walk free. If you don't, you are stuck in jail. Now, where this really becomes a problem is for crimes like, for say, shoplifting, right? A single mother with a cocaine or opioid addiction who shoplifts from a local pharmacy, Walgreens or CVS, and gets locked up and gets a $350 bond, but doesn't have the means to pay that. $350, sometimes $200, but doesn't have family who can take care of it and doesn't have the means to pay it. That lady ends up languishing in the Cook County Jail on 26th in California for 6 months in some cases because she can't afford to pay that. Now, who's watching her kids? Who's taking care of her business decisions? Who can be the head of that family if the person who is the breadwinner is now in jail for 6 months? It puts the young people into the DCFS system. It upends this entire family. And so what we decided to do was that we would create a truer, more just system where whether or not you were sitting in jail was depending on what you did, not on how much money you have.
There are disparities going on across the internet, scaring the living hell out of people. To the point on the internet, they are saying January criminals and people can purge in the state of Illinois. Please address the disparities of the Safety T Act versus falsehood, like it would allow criminals like rapists, murderers, and kidnappers who are currently in jail or committed such a crime to go free. Please explain.
Yeah, so those things are just straight up lies. They're not the truth. And
But
so,
how so if the governor, the presumptive governor, Bailey, is running ads currently scaring the you know what out of
I
seniors?
know what he's running. It's still a lie. It doesn't matter whether or not he's running the ads. It's still not true. And the truth of the matter is this: there is nobody who's in jail today who automatically gets out of jail on January 1st, no matter what the charge is. It is not a ex post facto law. It is not a retroactive law. So that's number one, not true. Number two, anyone who is arrested and charged with a crime in Illinois, still with this law, still has to face a judge, and a judge will make a determination on their dangerousness, on whether or not they can be let go without bail, or whether they have to be held in custody until their case, um, until they have their trial. Right? That does not change. It does not create a category for what people are calling these quote unquote non-detainable offenses. There is no such thing as a non-detainable offense in Illinois law. And so these are racially based fear mongering strategies. If you look at some of the ads that people are running and some of the things that people are putting on Facebook, they are taking mugshots of people who look like me and you, black men, and using them, saying that these brothers are going to be in your backyard tomorrow once this bill passes. That is not the truth, and it is the most disgusting way to try to scare people to skirt the truth.
The Safety Act does require police officers to provide act to involve shooting or force. Also, they allows other officers to intervene if they are forced um, excessive force. So, with that being said, the Safety Act allows the police officer, if there's a police involved shooting or a shooting itself, to administer first aid. And it also allows the officer to intervene for excessive force. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that creates a culture within the police departments around the state. And once again, this is not just CPD, this is every police department in Illinois. I think it creates a culture that will build a better relationship between the department and communities. When a officer is able to render aid to somebody, that is within the lines of what their job is to do, to serve and protect, right? When an officer is able to step up when they see a colleague that's doing the wrong thing and say, listen, this, we can't roll with this. This is not the way we operate. That creates more continuity and more partnership between communities and the department. And so I'm glad that we're doing that. I think we'll see a big difference over time.
Some police officers might say they're not trained to administer first aid or they fear of lawsuits because of this. And the best way what they're doing it out is bleed them out to avoid lawsuits. I see the disgust on your face.
You know,
That's what's been going on for the past decade or so. If there's a police involved shooting, the person can still be alive today, but they allow them to bleed them out. Is there something in that clause that if you allow that person without first aid, is there consequences instead of allowing that person, regardless of right or wrong, to bleed them out?
it's not that law specifically talks about bleeding folks out, but what it does do is it creates a standard where officers are required, once again, if they can render life-saving aid, to do so. The fact that folks have ignored the human inclination to save another life because they're worried about a lawsuit, or just because they don't want to deal with it, is disgusting. And for folks to say that they're not trained that way, that means that whatever training these officers have gotten has been subpar. Um, we've got
But
to
isn't it partially the state to make sure it happens? They have enough funds to train them for medical needs or something like that,
that
just in
the
case?
state law does require that officers as first responders are trained in these life saving techniques. So anybody who's using the excuse that they're not trained, either there's an issue with that specific department, or it just is not true.
How can you assure residents this Safety T Act is to protect everyone instead of the criminals?
Yeah. Well, if you look at it, as I said in the beginning, this is about creating some real justice in our criminal justice system, a system that has not had justice at its core, a system that didn't provide justice for victims of crime, that didn't provide justice for communities where crime occurred, right? And so what we did was we turned that system on its head to create a more safer, a more fairer, and a more just system. We call folks to task on this. It's the criminals are being called to task on this. The judiciary is being called to task on this. Law enforcement is being called to task on this. All entities um, in this space are being called to task on this. And truthfully, the way we got here is that there was a task force put together by the Illinois Supreme Court, the judiciary, and they had some recommendations after that task force saying this is how we create a better criminal justice system in Illinois. We sat down with law enforcement. We sat down with state's attorneys and prosecutors around the state. We talked to crime organizations, crime victim organizations. It's the reason that people like the Illinois Network Against Domestic Violence endorsed this bill, because they thought that people who were suffering domestic violence and folks who were caught in these situations would be safer if these pieces move forward. And so, listen, this was a long process. We'll continue to perfect it. We'll continue to do the work to make sure that it's right. But this is to keep everybody in this state safer.
Why the Black Caucus didn't get ahead of this? Why the state reps allow the internet to go berserk on this and scaring the bejesus instead of holding meetings to discuss the Safety T Act? Why they
Oh, we
just
did. We
allow
did.
that?
We did. So we even before the bill was passed, right? We went through 10 public hearings, 40 hours of public testimony on this. I personally traveled around the state talking to anybody who would listen about this because it was important. Unfortunately, we can't dictate how people use spurious lies to try to fearmonger, right? You know, we have now responded to let folks know what's true and what's not true. And I appreciate my colleagues and even folks from around the country who have come in and say, listen, no, I'm reading this bill. This is what it really does. But listen, when you're dealing with unscrupulous actors, like the people that we're dealing with in this space, folks who once again want to play on your fears and lie to people, there's not much we can do to try to stop them from saying what they're saying. But what we can do is continue to once again stand up and stand out and say, this is what we're here for. This is the work that we've committed to, and this is how we'll get it done.
You're running for mayor. How can you heal the city for decades of separatism?
Yeah, Chicago needs a real uniter. We know that there has, as you said, been decades and decades of separatism, of racism, of segregation, and we see lack of resources in communities that need it the most. We see benign neglect when it comes to housing and education and the way we police and economic development. Uh, the only way to appropriately move the city forward is to move us all forward together and to make sure that we're putting money, once again, resources and attention in the places that have been left behind, the forgotten corners of the city, much like the neighborhood that I grew up in, and even the neighborhood that I live in now, where there is literally the tale of two cities in the haves and the have-nots. Chicago is the greatest city in the world, and only way that we can truly embrace that moniker is if we do the work, right? Chicago used to be called back in the day the city that works. Even when the city that worked, it didn't work for everybody. And so it's incumbent upon me in this space to commit to doing the work, to once again right the wrongs of the past, but to make sure we don't continue to go down that road.
Billions of dollars are coming into the city of Chicago and more due to the Federal Reconstruction Act, the federal bill. Um, you go down to Eaton's 290, you see construction. You don't see one black person on that construction site.
Yep.
You're running for mayor. How can you make these constructions say, if you bid for these contracts, if I don't see it, I'm pulling your you know what out?
That's it. That's right there. That is the answer. It's a very simple answer. Um, Contracting in Chicago for subcontractors and for prime contractors need to look like the population of the people here. And if these projects don't have it, then they will not get off the ground. This is very akin to things that we've seen in the history of this country, specifically Maynard Jackson, who was the former mayor of Atlanta um, years and years and years ago. But what Maynard said when he was mayor and they were preparing to build the new airport in Atlanta, was that he would rather uh, weeds grow on the runway than greenlight a project that did not have the proper minority representation. That would be the same spirit I will have in the mayor's office.
Next issue that's on the top of people's radar is education. Do you think the mayor of Chicago has too much control over the educational system in Chicago? Is it time for a balance of power with state and city working together?
Well, listen, the state provides money to the city, and what we've seen over the last couple of years, and I'm very proud to have helped push this, is that more money from the state government has come to the city specifically for education matters, so we can fully fund CPS. We're not there yet, but there's still, we're a lot closer than we used to be. What also is true is that um, the complete mayoral control of the Chicago public school system has created some problems, specifically for communities where Black folks live and exist. Right, we saw the school closings. A few years back, we see the lack of resources in our communities, and I fought for that very hard in Springfield to make sure that we can push back on that and get dollars and resources where they need to go. What I also fought very hard for was for Chicago to come online and come aligned with every other school district in the state, and to have an elected representative school board, which is a law that we passed in Springfield last year, and it will soon come into effect. And so it will create some more balance and some more parity, so that the mayor of Chicago does not. Um, uh, so the mayor of Chicago is not the ultimate decider when it comes to the education of our young people.
People are saying there is a shortage of teachers. However, there are many educators who are applying for grammar schools, teaching position, high school teaching position, and collegiate positions as well. However, there are not hiring them, even though they have little experience. Why you say they have a shortage of teaching positions and they're being discriminatory towards people who are applying for them? What I'm saying in essence is you're saying you have job openings. There's plenty of job openings out there. I sent in my application and crickets, nothing. Some are saying that because, in which leads this is going to be an extensive question. According to the Chicago Tribune, black educators who were wrongfully terminated from their positions at the Chicago Public School won a lawsuit because of discrimination in hiring practices. People believe that some educational institutions are holding these positions for Hispanics and whites are not hiring blacks. More lawsuits are on the way, according to that article, because many black educators who are applying are not getting these positions. You, um, I know you are an educator yourself, and being discriminated in an educational system is is almost speechless. As mayor, you have grammar school, you have colleges, universities, city colleges. It doesn't represent blacks anymore. What you gonna do?
Let's back to the same answer when we talked about contracting. Back to the same answer when we talked about CPD, CPS, and city colleges, and every agency and department in the state, I mean, in the city government, needs to look like the people in Chicago and the people whom they serve. We know that CPS is a largely minority district, a very largely minority school system. But you're right, we have had issues in the past uh, with with firing and laying off of African American teachers without just cause. Um, that has to stop. I don't think we have a deficit in human capital. I think we have a deficit in where our priorities have been to make sure that we are once again providing these opportunities. My mother, as I said, spent 30 plus years as a Chicago public school teacher, as did two of my aunts, her sisters, and um, these were women who uh, helped move their family into the middle class because of these jobs. These were women who were born and raised in Chicago and went to Chicago's Teachers College, which now is Chicago State University, and educated young kids around this city. Um, Folks like them, we've got to have a path for them in this new generation, and I don't see that happening. So, as mayor, I would change
But
that.
some people don't see the path. I don't see if it's going left, right, middle. We don't see it. Only thing we're seeing is we're applying. They're saying to the media one thing, the reality is another. You're a mayoral candidate, presumptive candidate. Can you shine a light on this issue?
I can't speak to why it's been going the way it is now, right? I think there have been many failings of this administration. I think this mayor has failed in many cases, and I think this is one piece of it. I think what you have to do immediately is begin to recalibrate the hiring process with CPS once again to make sure that these schools are filled with people who will look like the students that they are teaching.
You currently have a transportation plan that you would like to set out. So please explain your transportation plan to us.
Yeah. So listen, I am a 30 plus year rider of CTA, and as I look at the CTA system today, I've never seen it so bad. I've never seen it so disjointed. There are a lot of changes need to happen. There's no first off, people don't feel safe. It's not safe. It's not clean. It's not well lit. It's not reliable. It's not accessible, and it's not equitable, right? And so those are things we have to attack immediately. How do we make it safer, right? We talked a little bit about cops riding trains and buses, but also there has to be a more robust apparatus to make sure when people when you see something, say something. What is the platform that people can anonymously give tips about what's going on the train, whether it be a cleanliness issue or whether it be a safety issue. How do we make sure that when you're on the corner of Ashland waiting for the 9 Ashland bus to come by, and the app or the tracker says the bus will be there in 5 minutes, that it actually is coming in 5 minutes, or that it's actually coming at all? Because what we've seen and what I've seen with my own eyes is that many of these buses and trains just don't show up now. We got ridership issues. How do we increase ridership on our most heaviest corridors, right? What does it look like to have bus dedicated lanes to make sure that buses can move through the city and people can get from their homes to their jobs with efficiency and speed? All of this has to be a part of the way we move the city forward because mobility is a very important tenet about living in the city.
What is your immigration plan? What's currently going on? The governor of Texas and Florida are sending immigrants to sanctuary cities.
Mhm.
Why not send them back to Texas or Florida if they are using federal dollars to say if you send them here, you should pay for them to come here. We are a sanctuary city if they come on their own. But with federal help, you have federal dollars in Texas. You have federal dollars in Florida. Why say come and again it's Xing people who is doing the process out?
Well, I'll say this: I just last week, I believe, our congressional delegation, including Congresswoman Kelly, Congressman Garcia, Congressman Davis, and Congressman Rush, have begun to ask the federal government for the funds to be able to provide resources for the folks who have come here, um, who were bused here in the case of Governor Abbott in
Should they, and I'm
Texas.
sorry to cut you off, should they take away some of the funds they give in Texas
Absolutely,
to bring it to Chicago?
absolutely,
So
absolutely.
why not file a federal lawsuit and say, if you're not bringing the money, don't bring them. But if you're bringing the money, okay, we can accommodate.
So yeah, I don't know if a federal lawsuit is actually the right way to go on that. I think that there's legislation that can be put in place. I think an executive order um, from President Biden can move some of those funds in a more fungible way, right, to make sure that they come to the places that are welcoming and accepting folks, and be pulled away from places like Texas and California. Sorry, Texas and Florida, who have refused to do their duty, right. And so I think once again our congressional delegation has joined other folks to start that process, and I think that it's very important.
Some people believe if they were Africans or Haitians, they will send them back like they did last year when they were crossing the border. As a lawmaker yourself, will you tell the governor, Governor Pritzker, to sue them and send them back? And you said, okay, that's not the way, that's not the right way. But if Haitians are listening to this show and Africans are listening to the show, they will feel some kind of way saying you're opening doors to Venezuelans, Hispanics, but us, you're shipping us back.
Yeah, listen, I've been very vocal about I think the huge failure in the federal government when it came to our brothers and sisters in Haiti specifically, um, uh, who were trying to make their way here and were literally turned back. I actually filed a resolution in the Illinois House of Representatives condemning that behavior, condemning that activity, pushing back on the federal government for not being more inclusive and open. I think that the the truth of the matter, the fact of the matter is that we did treat these folks differently, and this country has not stepped up yet to one acknowledge it and two to fix it. And so,
So can Pritzker do that? Can Pritzker? You're the head of the Black Caucus. Can you say, hey Pritzker, we need you to step this up a little bit because we have Haitians Americans in the city of Chicago. They have ancestors here. So and we have Africans
so
here.
once again, I think yes, but not. I think you're asking me about a lawsuit again. Um,
No, I'm not
yeah,
asking you. I'm saying step up pressure to Governor Pritzker.
listen,
Uh,
absolutely, and the Black Caucus has been very clear about this. And once again, we filed and passed a resolution that um, that embraced the fact that we didn't think that the way that the federal government, right? Because once again, this is not per se a Pritzker problem. This is a Joe Biden problem, right? And we
but
can't.
Pritzker can write a
He
letter
can write a
and
letter,
sit
but
and send
listen,
them.
we people voted for Joe Biden to be president of the United States, and so we can't let him off the hook, right? We
Right.
can you can take a letter from the governor, and that will be what it's worth. Um, but we got to call the federal government to task on this because they have the ability not just to write a letter, but to do something about it. I'm concerned with the action.
How much is it going to cost Illinois taxpayers for these migrants to come in the state of Illinois? Because as some people are predicting, it's going to cost us major money to accommodate them.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't seen analysis on what those numbers are. I think it's still yes remains to be seen how many people end up coming here. Uh, but there will be a price, no doubt about it. But I don't know if um, if the folks who crunched the numbers at the state level were prepared um, for what is happening today, right? And so I think a lot of this is folks being reactive as we try to figure out how to operate in this space.
You also have been in the news lately in regards to personal, and I'm being fair with this. This has been in the media regarding your DUI. Can you explain right now, for the record, and to get the record straight for people who are considering you,
Mhm.
your DUI? What's going on there?
Yeah, well, listen, I've been very clear about this since day one. I've been open, I've been honest, I've been transparent and accountable about the fact that I have made mistakes, right? And that those mistakes, thankfully, I've been able to learn from them and to pull myself together. Um, you know, I've had there literally have been years that have passed since the incident, right? And uh, since that time, there's been a lot of growth in my personal life. I mean, I've become a father since then. I've lost my father since then. There's a lot that has happened personally since then, but I've been even more courageous and aggressive in my leadership role. Right, my constituents have, you know, I've been very clear with them about it and about what happened, and they were able to give me another chance and to continue to vote me into office. I've had the conversation with my colleagues who still chose me in order to chair the Black Caucus, and my family, and once again my God about this. Right, um, I am extremely fortunate to be able to have learned from my missteps, and it's made me a better person.
Please give intellectualradio.com/iHeart radio station where they can get in contact with you.
Absolutely. You can find us on all things social media at Kam Buckner, KamBuckner. And we are on our website is camformayor.com. And we are looking forward to hearing from folks, to hearing questions, to hearing ideas and thoughts and observations about how we move Chicago forward and we bring everybody to a space where we create the city that we all deserve to live in.
And again, Black Caucus. One more question. A lot of people are saying that the Black Caucus are not getting the message out to people to see what they're doing down in Springfield. How are they getting the message out so we can be clear on it?
Yeah, so listen, I think there's a lot of ways that we interface with folks. We literally do dozens of town halls around this state every single year um, on every issue area that exists. There are folks who hold forums and uh, a number of things. There are 22 members of the Black Caucus around the state of Illinois. And they're not just in Chicago and Chicagoland area. We cover Waukegan and we cover Aurora and Rockford and Springfield and Champaign and Peoria and East St. Louis. Right, so we're all over the state, and I know people have been extremely accessible and open to making sure that we communicate with Black constituents around the state of Illinois. We'll continue to do that. We'll make sure that folks are seeing us, that we're visible, that we're able to answer any questions that people have about how to move the
How
state
can
forward.
someone be a part of the Black Caucus if they are interested in obtaining the information?
So you can check out the Illinois Legislative Black Caucus Foundation website. I think that's ilbcf.org, which will give you profiles of all of us members of the caucus and give you the information that you need about the legislation that we've been able to pass.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Thank you,
Thank you
sir.
so much. See, it wasn't that
Appreciate it,
bad.
man. It was all good, man. Thank you.
That's going to do it for us on the Drive at 5 on the intellectualradio.com/iHeart radio station. Thanks to Earl Winfrey, our executive producer. Wonder who is behind the scenes. You guys have a wonderful week.